And welcome back, everybody, for another surprise live stream. It is Friday. We're here to get freaky. We got a little bit of a theme. We're going to talk philosophy of mind and do an introductory conversation, sketch out some of the positions in philosophy of mind. So this is back to basics, philosophy for the people. We'll do some Q&A, and I want to give a few updates as well. But Professor, great to have you as always. Great to have you here. Yeah, so let me, Jim, if you don't mind, let me give a few updates on a couple of things before we dive in, and I want to grab some updates from you. First is we're doing a giveaway here. I've recently spoke with Josh Rasmussen. Speaking of philosophy of mind, he's actually got a new book out on philosophy of mind. Sorry, it's hard to see on the virtual background. Let me try and get it in. Anyway, you'll notice I have 2 copies, and one of these copies is for one of you, gentle listeners. So if you want one, you just got to go watch the conversation with Josh. Leave a comment, like the video, all that good stuff. I'll be picking somebody at random. We'll send you a book, send you a copy of Josh's Who Are You Really? It's good. It's a good book. Other updates?
It doesn't have to be random. Go see Pat's Patreon, right?
I mean, hint, hint, wink, wink. We know that flattery gets you ever a little... there might be some bias towards those who want to flatter me economically as well. What else? Oh, my own books. I want to give a few updates, and I want to get an update on your book, Jim. So I finally heard back from the book I'm doing with Gavin. They say that our book is next in line with the editor. So I guess that means that we might be seeing it this year at some point, which is great news. My book with Sophia, my other book, is due out in July. And then I got another book. I think I told you about this, Jim. Did I tell you about this? I got another a book, kettlebell book, kettlebell book. Yeah, just got the deal to write. So just doing another hard pivot back from philosophy to fitness.
Nice.
So that will be coming along this year as well. But Professor, update us on some of your work. What's happening on that front? Mm-hmm.
The book, I'm told is coming out, right?
We're told these things. Like, people ask us, all the time. But when you work with publishers, like, I don't know, man. It's just it's a pain. It is.
The gears grind slowly, right?
Mm-hmm.
I was kind of hoping I would get the proofs back to make the corrections on it for Christmas break, and then I kind of hoped that didn't happen. I kind of hoped I'd get them back for spring break, and that didn't happen. So
here we are.
I don't know. So I this is a good reminder. I need to email them and ask them, not to nag. I mean, I understand I'm not.
Oh, sometimes you need to. Sometimes you really need to nag. Yeah.
But mine isn't the only project they're working on. I get that, and they're being gracious to publish a book that they don't probably make any money on. Right? And but I need to be able to plan my life, right? So
yeah. The problem with publishing is you usually have one of 2 issues. One is they just want to push out as much stuff as quickly as they can. And then as an author, you feel like the publisher doesn't care as much as they should about the quality of the project.
Right.
Or they do care about the quality of the project, but for whatever reason, they just can't get anything done. They're so slow, or they've got so much in the queue.
Yeah.
I've rarely worked with a publisher where I felt like they kind of hit that sweet spot. Now, if I were to have to deal with one of those 2 issues, I would rather it take longer, but the publisher is more invested and actually cares about the product more, rather than the publishers that just want to get stuff out quickly for the sake of getting stuff out quickly. Yeah. Okay, so go ahead.
Part of it too is, at the end of the day, I'm maybe the least ambitious person you know, and so I just I don't really care that much, and as long as it's kind of off my plate, I'm pretty comfortable moving on to other things, think of other things. So yeah,
no, believe me, I feel that. Okay, so let's quickly hit a theme for today's episode, and if anybody has any questions you guys want to jam around, of course we are here to do that. By the way, Winger's got a new album coming out. I'm sure you heard the news. 7 is 6. So Extreme has a new album coming out. Extreme 6 and Winger has a new album coming out, and I think they're calling it 7. So you have 6 and 7. Nice. Two of my favorite, like, late 80s, early 90s. Something's happening, Jim. Something's happening, and I'm all about it. Yeah, I'm here for it, as the kids would say. Yeah,
we burned through all the money, and like now they're like 50. And I'm thinking, oh man, retirement might not be as comfortable as we thought it would be, given that we retired at 30. Right?
And if you needed any other reason to come back to your hometown of Wisconsin, Winger will indeed be headlining the Waukesha County Fair this year.
Oh.
And there's a chance that we might be the opening act. It might be the same night that yeah, man. I mean, things are lined up. Things are finally coming around for Pat Flynn.
Dude, that would be like a high point peak experience for you, right? Like it could all end there and you'd be okay, right?
Yeah, just unplug and be done with it, dude. Yeah. So we'll live stream it on this channel, and then that'll be the last thing that I ever do, right?
Yeah.
Anyways, philosophy of mind. So let's do it. We'll get serious now, at least for a couple of minutes. We've been wanting to do kind of a basic intro. We've had a lot of, technical discussions on certain issues within philosophy of mind, but I thought it'd be cool just to sort of give an overview of the terrain. What is philosophy of mind? What sorts of questions do philosophers of mind ask? Right. I think that's a good way to kind of peer into a certain discipline. Just what sorts of questions are they asking? And then, Jim, if you wouldn't mind, help us to maybe give a taxonomy of the different positions and what they're all about. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I think, okay, so that's actually harder than one might even expect it to be, because I think for a lot of our listening / viewing audience, right, what they're concerned, what goes by the name philosophy of mind is really just a rather small subset of it, right? Okay, so I think what mostly, our viewers, listeners probably are concerned about in philosophy of mind is the mind-body problem, right? They're mostly concerned about whether or not materialism is true, right?
Yeah.
Or whether or not some sort of dualism is true.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but that's one concern, right? In philosophy of mind, there's a lot of other concerns that come up, right? So, and they all have bearing on each other, but there's incredible debates about the broad versus narrow mental content, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, internalism versus externalism.
Yep.
About mental content, right? There's issues, about like free will, which doesn't necessarily have bearing on the mind-body problem, but it often can get taken up under the broad rubric of philosophy of mind, right?
Yeah.
And so I just want to make that caveat. I'll go the mind-body problem thing because I think that's what the people are going to be most interested in hearing about.
Mm-hmm.
But there are other kinds of questions to be asked.
That's a good point. That's a good point.
And I think a lot of times we ignore those other questions at our peril, because they might show us important things that should be staked out in the mind-body problem, or maybe how important or unimportant the mind-body problem is. And I kind of tend towards that latter thing.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And as always, the boundaries are not are so sharp and defined as we would like.
Yeah. And then of course, then you have there's all sorts of overlaps with psychology and cognitive science and stuff like that, which I think makes it interesting. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And we could talk about different orientations. Are you approaching it phenomenologically? Are you approaching it analytically, et cetera, et cetera? Right?
Mm-hmm.
So, but to simplify all that, let's just go with kind of like mainstream, which by calling it mainstream basically means like 20 years ago, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Like outdated, right? Positions in like analytic philosophy of mind.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
Whatever I think about whether that's the way it should be done, right? Mm-hmm. Right.
What are you drinking, Professor? What do you got?
A little coffee.
Yeah, I need some myself. I just had a pretty great workout, but boy, my energy after it's just yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I'm drinking coffee from my Area 51 mug.
Nice.
That one of my students gave me. So, right.
Yeah, that's good. They know to the professor. Yeah.
They know. Yeah. Well, it's a student in my class on the UFO, so that would make sense, right? So, so I guess the way I look at it is I kind of have a safe sex attitude about analytic philosophy of mind. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that it should be done, but I know the kids are going to get into it, so we might as well teach them how to do it right. Do it safely.
Right.
So I know like a complete abstinence approach to it is going to be fruitful and probably just get me in trouble.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So it's sort of like if you must do it, let's do it safely.
That's good, smart. Yeah.
It's realistic.
He cares. Jim cares, right? Yeah.
I care. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so let's just make our broadest possible distinction here, right? And let's just distinguish between, say, materialism, right? Actually, it's gonna be a three-way distinction between materialism, dualism, and idealism.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
All right. And so, and I actually at this like taxonomic level, a lot of like Bernardo Kastrup stuff is really helpful in this. Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So the materialist is going to say, all there are material things. Okay. Dualist is going to say, no, there's like two fundamental kinds of things. There's material things and immaterial things. Okay. And then the idealist is going to say, no, there's only immaterial things in some sense of there is, right? And, let me set aside idealism, right? Just simply because maybe for bad reasons, it's not typically a position taken like terribly seriously.
I want to just mention something real quick on that because Kenny Pierce, friend of the show, he's an idealist. He put up a tweet today. I thought it was a pretty good tweet. His tweet was essentially this. He says, here are some views in analytic philosophy that are taken seriously that are much less plausible than Berkeleyan idealism.
Yeah.
And he puts presentism, mereological nihilism, mereological universalism, eliminative materialism, mathematical fictionalism, concrete modal realism, moral error theory, and humanism about causation. The one thing I might not put in there is presentism, but otherwise I think Pierce makes a tremendous point.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
But anyways, yeah, feel free to set aside because you're right. It isn't taken as seriously, at least from the impression that I get. Right. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so, and once again, in fairness, like, because I probably take dualism or idealism very seriously, but once again, I'm just trying to go as like mainstream as I can. Okay. Now, no, I made the distinction between materialism and dualism, not between naturalism and some sort of non-naturalism. Okay. And I think those are not necessarily the same distinctions. Okay. So I see materialism versus dualism is an ontological question. I see naturalism versus non-naturalism as an explanatory question. Okay. Right. So a materialist philosophy of mind, the way I would define it, or a physicalist philosophy of mind would say if we had all the physical facts fixed, right? If we had like a cognitive grasp on all the physical facts, we would then have a grasp on all the mental facts too.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Whereas a dualist at some level is going to deny that. There are facts, right, that are not simply physical facts. Okay. Now, I think you could claim that. You could say, yeah, there are non-physical facts, right? But yet say all of those non-physical facts are in some broad sense explained by natural categories, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. And I think you could, in a sense, be a dualist, but still be a naturalist.
Sure.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is
and there are dualists that are naturalists.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. Exactly. Okay. But for the way we're gonna divide it between materialists and dualists, right?
Cool. Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. So let's go into materialism. Okay. All right. I think your first move would be to distinguish between reductive versus non-reductive versions of materialism.
Right.
Okay. And what is a reductive materialist claiming? Well, I'm going to go with like old school type identity theory. Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, I think this word reduction is incredibly abused, mm-hmm. right? Okay. And I think we should look at like what reduction meant when it was initially introduced into the literature in philosophy of mind, right? And it was actually introduced from a prior usage in the philosophy of science, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, where we talked about one theory being reduced to another theory. Mm-hmm. Okay, and like the going like traditional hackneyed example of that was always used, right? Would be, I think it is the reduction of the gas laws to the laws of thermodynamics.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And so what's the idea there is like the laws in chemistry where we like account for, right, the behavior of gases in terms of exploding, whatever, right? Mm-hmm. It was found, we could see those laws as in fact a subset, right, an application of the laws that govern thermodynamics. Okay. Mm-hmm. So the idea is the laws of thermodynamics explain more, okay, they have a broader explanatory power, and they still encompass everything that the gas laws explain. So the idea was, well, why would we need to posit extra entities, right? Mm-hmm. when we can just posit the entities that we already have in physics for thermodynamics in order to make sense of gases, right?
Yeah.
And so this is where then, we account for all of it in terms of like molecular motion, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the idea is there is where you might have thought like a gas was something over and above the molecule's composing it. As soon as you get the laws, right, are such that the one is broader and still explains the other one, right? Then you get like this argument by simplicity, right? To say, well, okay, then it must be that those things that are gases just are.
Right.
Right. Okay. And it's an inference to the best explanation. So it's fallible and all that. Okay. But when you go to your chemistry class now and you're taught gases just are, fill in the blank, right? This is what's going on there. It's a theoretical reduction, right?
Yes.
And so what you're saying is, yeah, it might do like it's good shorthand to talk about gases in certain contexts in chemistry, but no one's kidding themselves that gases are anything more than
right.
Okay,
that's right. It just is a convenient shorthand, right?
Yeah. Okay. And so then the idea is what you say there is gases are then definable in terms of behaviors or conglomerations of certain molecules. Okay, they're definable, right? Meaning you could have like you could line them up by types, right? You get a point there, right? Is the definition of gas is a certain kind of molecule that operates in a certain way, right? And that molecule, what that is to be that kind of gas, or operate in that certain kind of way. Do you see that? So you have a two-way movement there. Okay. All right. Now, and so like, how would that work now in philosophy of mind? So when we say mind is reducible to matter, what's usually being said there is a certain type of psychological state, a state of a cognizant being that is describable with mental predicates, say, is tasting chocolate or is thinking about Paris, what have you. Okay. Is definable in terms of a certain type of state that goes on in a nervous system. Okay. So call the mental state type, call that, beta, and the physiological state type, right, call that zeta. Okay. What the reductionist is saying is you can say zeta if and only if beta, or beta if and only if zeta, both ways, right? Okay, it's if and only if, right? They're the same thing. So the definitions actually map onto each other one to one. Okay?
Yeah.
All right. And so that's interesting. It's suggested simply based on theoretical simplicity. And if indeed we can come up with a law-like generalizations about what's going on in brains, right, and we can correlate those properly with what's going on in minds, it would seem you have like a simplicity argument that can go there.
Yeah.
All right. Now,
and just for the listener's sake, you feel free to do whatever you want, Jim, as we know you will. But we're not here to evaluate or critique all these questions. We're just trying to just map the terrain so people can understand what's going on in the wider debate. Right. Go. Yep.
Okay. All right. So although that like straight reductionism like that is like made a comeback in relatively recent years. Okay, but it had a short shelf life. Okay. So like that, what I described there would have been, a quick and dirty version of like what JGC Smart and some people like that were doing in the 50s and the 60s, right? But by the time you get to the 70s, it's already like there's some worries about it. Okay, and so there's the neo-chauvinist objection to this is made, right? And the idea is well, we want to say that like say pain in us is correlate. We humans is correlated with a certain neurophysiological structure. Okay. And then, but in some other animals that we might want to say are in pain, they don't have one-to-one the same neurophysiological structures that we do. Okay. And so are we going to say then like those animals are in pain, right? That seems to be a bad reason to deny sentience to another animal, right? You see that. Okay. And there's this simple fact too, is like, it's not like we can say 100% one-to-one neurophysiological structures correlate between Pat and Jim all the way down, right? Okay.
Yeah.
There's tiny little differences. And you say, well, okay, yeah, but are they different enough? Well, once again, if we're talking definitional here, like, sameness-ish won't do it, right? If we're saying you define the mental state in terms of a certain brain state, then we better be able to define the brain state all the way down, right?
Yeah.
Now, and then so you get variation across species. You might even get variation within species. And really, like, do I ever really instantiate the same brain state twice? You see what I mean? All right.
Yeah.
So there's
you can see how there's wider issues here too, with like, hey, if you're an anomalist, I don't know, right? Maybe this wouldn't even be an issue for you, right?
Yeah, or just, I mean, just think of this is empirical fact. We know, like, you don't, in fact, like instantiate the same brain state twice, right? And there is plasticity, and like even just identifying distinct brain states is like, kind of a philosopher's fiction, because the whole thing's in motion in there, right? And there's never just like one discrete state of a brain. It's always going someplace, right?
Philosophers spinning fictions. That's never happened.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Right. Okay. So what's the move then? It's to say, well, okay, the identity doesn't go on at the level of types. It goes on to the levels of tokens.
Tokens, right? Yeah.
Okay.
This is good. We just talked about types and tokens in the last conversation, so it should be fresh in people's minds. Right?
Nice. So the idea here is, this is how I like to explain it. Okay, so this is what I do in the first book, right? Is you got a statue of Dumbledore, right? Okay, and that statue of Dumbledore is clay. It is clay in this particular configuration. Okay, so you got this statue of Dumbledore, and say it's in configuration 1, right? And in this case, that is sufficient. That's all you need to get a statue of Dumbledore, is for it to be in this particular configuration.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. But however, look, there could be other configurations that would give you a statue of Dumbledore, right? So we can't identify at the level of type statue of Dumbledore with this configuration. We're going to have to say there's a lot of configurations that could get you the statue of Dumbledore.
Right.
Okay. All right. And so it looks like we have to say, well, no, it's just the way it worked out in this case is being the statue of Dumbledore is being this configuration. Okay. But we're admitting there's other cases where you could have different configurations. And in those cases, right, in those tokens, that would be enough to have a statue of Dumbledore. Okay. So what you get then is a long disjunction of possible states that would be token identical to mental states, right? So to be in pain is to be in zeta, or to be in, beta, or to be in et cetera, down the stretch there. Okay. And so that's what it means to be a non-reductive physicalist, right? Is to say, yeah, I'm not saying we can define a mental state in terms of any particular brain state. What I'm saying though is, give me any token mental state, and there will be a token brain state to which it is identical. Okay.
Yeah, that's great. Great introduction, overview of that.
All right. Okay. And an interesting position, I have to say, right? Right. And this is a kind of a sloppy way of defining supervenience and all that too. Okay. So,
right.
All right, but that raises a question. Okay. So, what justifies our putting something onto that disjunctively defined list of brain states, right? Like why is zeta, why is beta, why is lambda, why is alpha, whatever? Why are those brain states on the list of pains, right? Or scenes, greens, whatever, right? And not some other brain states, right? Okay. And you can't, or you don't want to, if you're going to be a physicalist, to say, well, we know these hurt, right? You don't want to appeal to like the intrinsic first person view of it, because like part of the whole idea here is like, how could we account for, say, something like pain without appealing to the intrinsic first person view of it, which gets us into all these sort of dualistic problems. Okay?
Yes.
There's a question of how the heck do we justify our disjunctive list? Okay?
Yeah.
All right. So this then is the move to functionalism. Because like what the functionalist is going to say, or what they do end up saying. And the thing is, like, functionalism has a life in other parts of philosophy of mind and cognitive science before it gets applied to this issue, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's to say, well, no, it doesn't matter what sort of arrangements instantiate the mental state, okay, whether they be zeta, beta, theta, whatever of brain states, or even some configuration in a silicone board in a computer, or some configuration in some unknown substance, right? What makes them a certain type of mental state is their function in a system, okay? So what is it to be in pain? In this case would be like, it is to, or what is pain, right? What is pain is, it's an internal state that processes a certain kind of injury input, right, with a certain kind of, say, avoidance output.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So we could then define pain, right, in terms of that kind of economy, right?
Mm-hmm.
We could come up with, well, if it's doing this work, it's relating these kinds of inputs to these kinds of outputs within an organism or a machine or what have you, then that's a token of pain.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. And it's interesting. It's important to note a functionalist is taking really no ontological stand, right? The functionalist is saying, hey, maybe that's something that's instantiated in a, in a biological and neurological system. Maybe that's something instantiated in a silicone system. Maybe that's something instantiated in a non-physical system. They're like, that's not our take. It's like, whatever else it is, like whatever instantiates it, what it is to have a pain is to have an internal state that does that processing work between you.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Right. But of course, this obviously now like becomes like one of the guiding like central concepts of the notion of machine consciousness.
Yes, and just to highlight the point you just made, functionalism, that essentially the mind is what the brain does, to the point about the apparent ontological neutrality there.
Mm-hmm.
Alex Proust has a really good paper. I'll try to remember to link it, which means I'll almost certainly forget. Must a functionalist be an Aristotelian? And it's making the case that the functions can only be defined within a sort of powers-based ontology. Interesting for people who just want to kind of read deeper into some of this stuff. Anyway, right. So yeah, continue. Yep. Mm-hmm.
All right. So so I think, okay, so there are other versions of materialism, right? Okay. But I wouldn't call them reductive per se. Well, actually, I think you could maybe make a case that something like really old school behaviorism of, I know, like we'll say Gilbert Ryle, and I know I even said Gilbert Ryle at one point. I don't think that's actually fair to Gilbert Ryle, right? But like old school behaviorism, more like Carnap, okay? Because like Carnap's writing before we really had a whole lot of really good neuroscience going on. Mm-hmm. So there were no real mind-brain correlations available at that point. And he says, I think we're going to get them someday, but we don't have them now, right? Mm-hmm. And the best he can do is have like, mental, statements and outward behavior observations could be correlated, okay? Mm-hmm. So he proposes that maybe there's identity just between the mental state and the behavior, okay?
Yeah.
And that's like famously wrought with difficulties, and people were quite relieved, right? With the mind-brain correlations going, right? So we could be like be over that, okay?
Yeah, right.
Now,
mm-hmm.
Okay, now the other one, like the other big, like another one of the big philosophy of mind-body problem materialist 101 positions is eliminative materialism, okay? Mm. And I don't want to necessarily call it illusionism, because I think illusionism is now something relatively new under the sun, and I don't doubt that it's subtly different from eliminativism. Okay, so I want to leave illusionism aside for now. Okay, so eliminativism, originally, like you see this proposed by a guy named Paul Feyerabend, who was a philosopher of science, and Richard Rorty at a time when he was working in philosophy of science, right? And eventually it's developed by Paul Churchland. I think both the Churchlands to some degree of sophistication. Okay. And those are all not Feyerabend, but Rorty and the Churchlands are all, I believe, students of Sellers. in one way, shape, or form. Okay. And Sellers in like his like masterpiece paper, which was like it's more like a book, but Materialism and Philosophy of Mind, makes a case that the very notion of the mental, like the very notion of psychological state, is a theoretical hypothesis. Okay. That he tells this tale where you could like start out with a race of human beings who do not have any kind of psychological predicates in their language. Okay. But eventually posit psychological explanations in order to explain like counterfactually the behavior of other people. Okay. So its idea is like maybe the origin of psychological language was not introspection, was actually outward observation, right? Someone realized like, had Smitty not been under the illusion that, the plant was red, he wouldn't have eaten it and thereby not died, right? So you're saying there was this illusion, an internal state in Smitty that explains some of his behavior, right? Okay. And then Seller says, now, so it's a theory. Okay. This is where you get the idea of like folk psychology as a kind of theory. Okay?
Yes.
It's not an observation. It's a theory to explain observation. And then you at this, then like eventually these primitives, so-called, right, get really good at making these kinds of like theoretical inferences, and they apply them to themselves internally too. Like, oh, I did this. I must have done that because I was thinking this, looking back at things after the fact. Okay. So even the application of psychological predicates first person is still a theoretical inference, not a direct observation. Okay. Okay. And so the idea then is like, okay, so folk psychology is a pretty good theory. It made some good predictions, both of ourselves and others, et cetera, et cetera. But Sellers says, if you get a better theory that gives you a more economical explanation, then it would seem then there would not be any need to keep those predicates around.
We can just get rid of the whole project, right?
Yeah, the whole project, right? Okay, because it doesn't play a role in theory. Okay, or there's a better, more efficient theory, a simpler theory. And Sellers like kind of says, yeah, maybe it'll happen, right? Okay, it's not, the brain size isn't there yet, but by the time you get to like the church ones, like they're like, hey, well, here's the deal, man. We've got pretty good mental physical correlation going on now, right? And we think at some point it will become just clear that the folk psychological posits play no explanatory role anymore, and we would do well to jettison them for theoretical purposes. Okay, you see that, right? Now, and so then the idea is like there is no need then to posit anything but the brain state in our like cognitive science, in our psychology, in our theoretical musings, right? Now, important thing to note there is, I think people miss this, is they are not saying like the mental is the physical. They're not doing that, right? They're not saying it turns out like the gases are like molecules in motion, right? They're not saying it turns out mental states are brain states. They're saying there was once a pretty good theory up and running, right? And now that theory has been shown to be outmoded by a new theory. Like, so the example is always that like at one point the going theoretical postulate to explain corrosion and burning was the existence of phlogiston, right?
Yeah.
Okay, but now it's now the existence of oxygen, right?
Yes.
But no one's saying it turns out phlogiston is oxygen.
That's right. There just is none of that junk, right?
It had its day, moving on. Right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Let me offer one quick comment, and you can comment on the comment, Professor. There is, I think it is important before, because for reasons that I don't entirely disagree with, of course, a lot of people kind of bark at eliminativism, but there is a kind of more modest form of it where just say, hey, we can eliminate a certain form of talk when it comes to certain theories, but they don't go on to the more fully muscled eliminativism, if you know what I mean, right? And that more modest one, I actually don't have much of a huge issue with, right? It's when when you go more along the line of the church lens that I think you start to maybe wind up with some right. I'm trying to be as neutral to this conversation as I can. Obviously, I'm not an eliminativist, right? But there is a camp of it that's much more modest, and
just because I'm a bit of a troll, right? Okay. I've been thinking of writing a paper on my Substack saying, like, why I'm an eliminativist and a epiphenomenalist. Okay.
Yeah, oh, that's
Okay.
interesting. Yeah.
Because I mean, so okay, so as far as I can tell, and I actually want to go back. There's a new edition. I mean, like in the last like 5 years of Churchland's Matter and Consciousness that I haven't read yet.
Yeah,
So
I
I want
haven't
to go
read
back
that.
and read that sucker, right?
Mhm.
Okay. It's been a long time since I sat down with Matter and Consciousness.
Mhm.
That's like Churchland's like textbook. It's a good textbook, by the way.
Yeah.
Anyway. But I want to go back. I want to read the new edition because I want to get really clear. Like, it seems like you could say, all right, you're right. Psychological predicates play no role in psychological and neurological and cognitive science theorizing. Okay. All right. But then there's there's a question, right? Do you go with Wilfrid Sellers and say science is the measure of all things, that they are, and that they are not, right? Okay, because yeah, if you take Sellers' extremely robust scientific realism, then it would seem that would have consequences far outstripping just like what is like appropriate methodology in cognitive science and neuroscience, right?
That's right. That's right.
Okay. However, if you don't buy the scientific realism that comes from Sellers, and this is like completely benign and really just a question of like what is or is not gonna like is like relevant to a very, very specific type of empirical inquiry.
That's exactly the point I was trying to bring out. There's an eliminativism that is completely benign when appropriately understood, right?
Yeah. You know what I mean? So,
and in that sense, I guess I am like I would probably endorse that eliminativism.
Yeah. Okay. Right? I just don't. So like I think if you begin with Husserl's Crisis of European Sciences, and you say, look, theorizing is an abstraction of the life world. The life world is not an abstraction of our scientific theorizing.
Yeah.
Okay. So the ultimate ontological bar is in the life world. Okay. Do you know what I mean? And you say, no, like our relationship to things in the life world is not theoretical. Okay. All right. It's not a positing of unseen entities or what have you. Do you see what I mean? And that's a long story to tell, right? Okay. But that's the story I want to tell now.
Okay. I think that's right.
Yeah. Then it seems to me, I don't know, I think, like introspective psychology of the sort that like, that's being rejected here. It was right to reject that, right? As a science in some ways.
Yep.
Does that make sense? So in a lot of ways, I think, eliminativism, if seen that way is completely benign, right? And same thing with epiphenomenalism. Epiphenomenalism is the view that, there are mental states, and usually this runs more towards qualitative states, qualia, but they actually play no role whatsoever in the causation or explanation of behavior, right? Okay.
And by the way, this relates to Andrew's question. He just asked what epiphenomenalism is, so maybe just tie that in right there, right?
And one, I mean, I'm not. I can live with epiphenomenalism about qualia, and I think I actually might even be a qualia anti-realist in some ways, right? Okay. But once again, like leaving that aside, though, okay, so what you're saying is qualia play no role in an explanation that is relevant to the sciences of psychology and cognitive science, et cetera, okay, fine, right? But as long as you don't go with Sellers' science is the measure of all things, right? The scientific realist thing, I don't see how that would be odious to anything that matters.
Right. Right. Yeah. Also,
yeah,
relatively, if not completely benign, right? So that is how one could be. I'm trying to think of like your trolling and provocative headline. Like there'll be stuff like, "Oh, I'm Catholic and pro-abortion" or something like that. Right. Yeah. You have to think of I'm the blank, yet an eliminativist and epiphenomenalist, right?
How I learned to quit worrying and embrace epiphenomenalism.
Something like that's good. We'll wait eagerly for that subsection.
Yeah, no, it's on the near doc, because I'm actually going to be writing in the coming months here, like a really big paper on a follow-up of my problem of pain piece.
Yeah.
On animal consciousness, right? So this is going to be on my docket for a while.
Yeah, on the brutes. Yeah. This is good. really, really helpful so far. You're really mapping the terrain very clearly and very well. I hope this is helpful to people because this is a great intro. Here, people didn't know Jim actually took off his classes today, and now I just have literally made him like teach a class, like the first class. I'm sorry, so you didn't get completely off, right?
That's right. Yeah.
But yes, please continue. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, no. So why don't we do this? Is because we got a pretty big chunk out there, and maybe we'll do a follow-up episode where we'll do like
the dualist side. Yeah, I think that's great. I think
right.
we've covered a good amount for today. So I'll just title this part 1.
Yeah.
And then if people have any questions about this, we can hit those in the follow-up as well.
And you know, it's funny. Like I was literally I was late for the podcast because I was finishing up reading a chapter of a book by Peter Carruthers on philosophy of mind stuff. And it's like, I was so far down that rabbit hole, right? Of very technical stuff. It's been very hard to pull back up to like an intelligible level.
It's really funny how you can, how that happens. Like sometimes you just, I mean, that was the problem with my editor. The biggest issue my editor has had with my current book. And he's a good editor. So I'm saying it's definitely me, not him, is exactly that issue, right? You get down such technical rabbit holes that it becomes the problem of knowledge is what it's called, that you kind of like, you forget what it's like to not know everything that came before. Right. So I've had to like, through this editing process, really just kind of zoom back out like really far and remember like who my audience is for this book and realize that like at the level of distinctions I'm playing at, like, boy, this is this just isn't appropriate. Right. Yeah. But it's hard. It's hard to like zoom way back out and like, just try and come back to, oh yeah, what are the basics of this whole debate. Right. But that can actually be very helpful because you zoom back out and you look at the basics again. It can help tidy things up or shine some further light downstream too. So it's a principle in martial arts, isn't it? You always come back to the basics, right? Just come back to the basics, right? Mm-hmm. So good. Anything else we want to say before we wrap this one up here?
No.
Professor, let me just highlight a few comments here. Paula Corafa says, I wish one day in the future to go to the USA, meet you guys, to learn philosophy, improve my English, and enroll with Jim. Greetings from Brazil.
I don't know about rolling with a Brazilian who's come here to get me. I don't know. I'll give you a chance to choke me out anytime, buddy.
Well, Jim and I have already begun brainstorming what sort of cheap motel we're gonna.
That's right.
We're gonna rent for our Philosophy for the People annual conference this year.
Right,
so
right.
You might well get your chance, my friend.
That's right. You might well. We'll make sure there's a match there.
Yeah. Good stuff. All right, let's just take this one question from Andrew and we'll wrap this up. He says, one of the craziest things I've heard about Merleau-Ponty is that he was a liberal naturalist. It seems like such an unwarranted analytic interpretation of his phenomenology, even if he was a sort of odd sort of atheist. Any thoughts, Jim? This one's definitely for you. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's a complete misread of Merleau-Ponty and like an attempt to put him into categories he's like trying to deny, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, he's very clear. He does not think like there's any complete naturalistic account to be given of much of anything, right? Okay, but he also is quick to say he doesn't think there's some alternative supernaturalist account to be given, right? And like for Merleau-Ponty is a phenomenology of what it would mean to like live with finitude, right? And he also though is like very clear, especially in later work, that he thinks that doesn't mean nothing can show up for us in our like lived experience that would be in some sense transcendent. For him, though, it's just there's no absolute guarantee of that happening, and that's what he calls his atheism, right? Which he very clearly says, I'm not denying. I'm not saying like among the things there isn't a God, right? Mm-hmm. What he means by his atheism is that there's just no guarantee that God, if there is one, is going to show up for you. Right. Mm-hmm. So for him, it's an embrace of a kind of human fallibility.
Mm-hmm. Good clarification. Gentle listeners, thank you for tuning in. Thank you, Professor, for this excellent part 1 on Introduction to Philosophy of Mind. Yeah. We will continue part 2 probably here in the near future. Yes, you want to?
No, I would say in fairness, because we griped about publishers. Okay. Mm-hmm. In fairness to the publisher of my first book, if you wanted a much more careful and responsible presentation, what we talked about today, pick up Mind, Matter, and Nature.
Definitely do that. It's a great book. It really is a great book. Yeah.
And like I think it could have been more charitably priced for the student, but I think by now there's probably a goodly number of used copies.
I just pulled it up on Amazon. It's $34. Honestly, obviously, I think it's totally worth that price. I think, and given that this is it's a serious book. And so in terms of serious academic level books, that pricing is actually quite reasonable, I think. Now, that's in comparison to pricing that I think is totally unreasonable across the board on
academic books. Yeah. No, and as I said, you can't afford not to buy that book, frankly. But right. But also, I want to know, like, I think I make like $1 a copy on the thing. Right. So
yeah, I had to do that. Somebody commented. I shared Josh's book. Just listeners, go grab both of these. Grab Jim's book and Josh's book. And Josh's is like around the same price. And somebody commented on the Facebook, thing about the price. And yeah, I don't know what to say. Like authors hardly make anything on these books, and we have nothing to do with the price. We have nothing. Almost nothing to do with the price. I say almost nothing because I was just with my latest deal. The acquisitions editor was asking me, what would you like this book to be priced at? And I gave my opinion, which I'm sure is just going to be thrown right into the trash. Right. So, but beyond that, it's just out of our control. So the most I can say is, I think these books are worth it. If you're serious about these subjects, I mean, it's like a dinner at Applebee's, right? You got to compare it to the relevant things. We know you're going to Applebee's. Just skip it for one night.
Yeah. No, man, I do that calculus. I'm like, I could go out to lunch.
I could get those riblets or
right?
It's like riblets. What is it? It's been a minute. It's riblets and like what else do they have? I just remember the riblets for Applebee's. It's good.
Riblets, right? I know this much. Riblets is not a natural part of the human diet.
That's not, dude. Now I'm super curious. There's an Applebee's down the street. I have to see if they still have riblets. On the menu.
Like, you might think you're better than the people lining up at McDonald's for McRib as you like order your plate of riblets at Applebee's, but you know what?
It's all coming from the same spot.
You're lying to yourself. We're talking chopped and formed non-pork product here, no matter what. Right?
So I heard whispers. I don't know if it's true. And by whispers, I mean, I noticed this on the poster as I walked into a McDonald's the other day, that the riblet is on its, not the riblet, but the McRib is on its farewell tour. This is its final season, or so they say. I don't know if this is just marketing hype. It's like the band Kiss, they're on their 20th farewell tour, but there you
go. We can only hope. Right?
I love that Kevin just came in. He says he's late. And he's philosophy of mind. We're talking about riblets. Hey man, you get what you get. We did actually discuss philosophy of mind for the majority of this episode, but now, but now
poor Kevin was spending his afternoon doing otherwise productive, important engineering projects.
Right.
And he comes in to hear these two morons talk about the relative value of riblets in McRib, right?
Yeah, man.
On a Friday in Lent, no less.
On a Friday. So I will not be having my riblets today. I'll be having some sort of soy paste or something like that. Yeah. Good stuff, man. All right, we're gonna close it. We're gonna close it out there. I actually have to go to Costco. I have to go to Costco here in a minute.
Nice. I have to go grocery shopping to get the makings of dinner for my sons. So
yeah, good man. All right. Well, thanks for tuning in, everyone. We'll do part 2 here. We'll cover the other the dualistic side of things in the next taxonomy episode. So please like, share, comment, and we'll catch you guys next time. Peace.